speaking as opposed to the person up there adjusting, that I'm so used to being loud that it takes a second for it to catch up with the fact that I'm loud.
It has to tone down.
Tones me down. I notice that with different people. You know, someone speaks and then it automatically.
Well, the problem is they don't hold the mic to their lips.
Well, the hand one, true, but the podium.
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking about the podium. The new sound system with the podium.
Right.
Calibrates on its own.
Oh.
So the mic is in the right place. It will calibrate regardless of your height, regardless of your
Beth Johnson.
sound, your voice.
Good stuff.
And so you'll notice
Anne
now that I say
actually
that, as
taught
soon
a
as someone
seminar.
speaks,
I mean, this was the
if
dark
they're too
ages.
low, you'll
Feminist
notice
theology
within
at
5
Nashotah
seconds,
House
it
at
will go
seminary.
up. And if they're
I think she
loud,
used this book.
like
It
Sam
it
or
has
Shelley,
underlinings, and I don't
it will
usually
go,
underline
or
books.
Matt Hunter, it will go down.
Yes.
So,
But
this,
it doesn't
I've read them both,
automatically,
and they really,
but it takes a
they-
second. So now that I say that,
I've gone
you'll
through
notice.
a lot of
So
awakenings.
nobody has to adjust the
Right.
microphone. And
I don't know whether you have, but
And you're right.
I'm still awakening.
I think it's, we're always
Yes, that's what,
being drawn deeper into mystery.
yeah.
That's still not.
I would grab some coffee too.
Is it when they're at the podium?
But it's neat, and, you know,
But I would think with hearing aids,
hearing aids,
that it would be,
you would think of
yeah,
that first.
yeah.
You
I
ever look
remember
at
when
Commonweal magazine?
I subscribe to it, yeah.
There's a long article in
Outdoorsy voice.
I think it's the most recent one about the movement in the Catholic Church for ordination of
Okay,
women.
great. I'll miss it.
And going
I'm gonna
back to
miss it
the
because I
call
have
to
to go
action
grab
days right after
Oh,
Vatican
cool.
II. And we had a
Not
lot of
last,
Catholic
yay.
friends and we went to call to action
But I'm
meetings.
not sure
because
We're surrounded by
it talks
people who
about
love
how
you.
Everything was very excited and they thought,
We have an
well,
audience.
it'll come right along.
Of love.
And then,
Then 1968 was quite a year for
yeah.
slamming the brakes on things. So with the Humane Vitae, the encyclical by Paul VI was, I think,
Yeah, it was-
disappointing to a lot, well, we'll say to most. And I think that the authority that the magisterial documents had after that started to, yeah. And I mean, if you know the history surrounding the consultations prior to that, that it was the minority position of the, the consultants and
And it was just flying in the face of what people were actually doing. It was
there's
really
something about, right, the reception of doctrine and the sensus fidelia, sensus fidei fidelium, as they, like to tout it. But, and I am sensitive to the argument that just because everyone is doing it doesn't make it right. But I think that there could have been far more careful articulation of
I was opposed to
concern.
the ordination of women, and then in seminary I learned that there really wasn't a theological case of any seriousness.
Not if Christ saves all,
And then,
not just men.
right, and that baptism is the pure sacrament.
Right? It's the universal priesthood, and so the representation of that should be
And then in my first
Representative.
as a curate, I saw
Interesting.
theologically, I mean practically how this is flying in the face of sense and sensibility. And then I look, well, what am I defending now by saying, well, the guys could do this? So that was
That's it.
a moment of conversion.
yes.
And so they would want a generation to do that. So when I was raising James,
Good morning.
Good morning. Liz is off in Washington, D.C. this weekend. She's our niece is celebrating her first communion at Holy Trinity Church in Georgetown. So she's there. She's picking up customized cupcakes for the celebration afterwards, and
How old is first communion? What age is it?
usually it's third grade. 8, 9 years old.
Want me to turn the lights on?
No.
Would anyone else like to have an opinion?
Yeah, the more we just have opinions, right?
Yeah, soon, I just say no.
This is a holiday weekend, so the beginning of spring vacation, so.
Oh,
right.
that's right. Okay.
Affects,
So it's going to be a little.
Everybody with little people.
well,
Little skiers.
and just other people.
Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be any skiing left. I mean, maybe if you go up to Jay Peak or somewhere,
No,
but
this is time to fly to Florida.
Which is ironic, such a late, because
Yeah.
now it's getting pretty clear finally.
right.
Yeah, I hate to,
Where
yeah.
is it? What
Right
day?
there, right there, look over there. I think the beginning of April is the part of April to miss.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then the second half of April, you start to see things come to life, it's kind of fun to watch.
Mud season.
It is, yeah, when you have
Well, no,
dogs,
that's the beginning of it.
We're kind of past that at least, right?
Adjust to daylight savings time.
no, they don't. I'm out of my, yeah, I hate daylight savings time. I just wish they.
Atlantic Standard. Let's just go.
I agree. I
Let's
think
just-
that all the sleep study people say we should go to standard time.
Yeah.
I don't need to have it light at 9 o'clock at night in
No.
July. Actually, at some point,
I
the
want
thing
it
that
dark.
I want it dark, and I actually like in the wintertime when at 4 o'clock it gets dark and you go, oh, guess it's time to wind down.
Right.
It's not time to gear up
That
and
was-
go for a walk or go to the grocery store.
That was the nice thing
Keep
about,
on going.
yeah, Honduras, because we were so far, to closer to the equator. The daylight maybe varied by an hour. So it set at 5 o'clock in the in the winter time and 7 o'clock in the
Whenever
summer.
sunset, it got dark.
Yes.
Bang.
China, did you realize that China does not have its enormous,
One zone.
they have one, what's the word?
Time zone.
Yes, yeah,
I did not know that.
it's crazy.
How do they do that?
It just.
Artificially.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, it's totalitarian government.
Well, I was just thinking about, I guess it works well for the trains, but your kid is gonna be going to school at noon in one part of the world.
Right.
in the
Right.
country, and at 6 a.m. in another part of the country.
For that huge country.
I've been several times to Russia, and they have white nights, right?
Oh.
So it's never dark.
Oh, I would hate that.
I remember that in
That was kinda freaky.
Scandinavia, people walking around at 11 o'clock and it was so light and I wanted to
Just
go
go to
to
Las
sleep.
Vegas.
Iceland.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
there you
I,
go.
like 9 o'clock, it's light, I'm sorry, Martha, I'm like, woo-hoo, I love it.
You do?
Yes, I love it. I love the daylight. And so I just get so excited when it's like, oh my God, it's still light out. I just love that. So I'm the opposite.
It's
I
dark in
love-
the morning, I mean, hey, Paul, I prefer it, I don't know. It starts to get lighter anyway, so to push it, I don't know.
There's that 1 minute a day that just feels so delicious.
If you have a cat that wants to get me up to feed it, it doesn't understand about time change or anything.
Yeah, the dogs take forever to get used to it one way or another, it drives them crazy. And they say that people with, children with developmental issues and autism, that they really struggle
Mhm.
with this. That it just,
We should just leave things, so I understand why they did it originally,
yeah.
but that's over.
Gotta get those potatoes in.
Right.
Get the potatoes in.
Well, you could argue that about school summer
Farming.
vacation. I mean, I know it would ruin the tourist industry and the summer camp industry and all that, but I always thought, oh my God, could you please, let me take my children on vacation in February and then keep them in school in July when I
That's
don't
what they do in
mind.
New Zealand where my grandson has been teaching. There's 4 equal semesters of class, school classes, and I forget there's 3
Yeah.
I think that's
Or you could just
great.
even 6 weeks in the summer just to give a little bit more extended, but you
Yeah.
don't need, you know,
Yeah.
12.
Yeah, 12 is hard on the mothers, I can tell you that. And also, it was like, I had 4, and it was like, with a 12-year age spread, so you've got, one who's being driven all over, well, usually multiple, you've got one at summer camp and on that side of town, one in, that needs to be entertained all day, and one that's getting dragged around all the, everything, and it's like 12 weeks of that. I didn't used to like summer very much. Now I do. But
Hello, Emily.
short vacations.
Greetings. Oh, you're always so bright and cheerful looking, Emily, recent weeks. I'm 100%.
season shirt.
I'm like
Back
black.
coordinates with your scarf. Did you even notice that?
At the last minute.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's perfect.
and that's your shirt. Oh, well, thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much. You know what I meant to say at the last, and I was saying going out. Did you know, Mark, that's a Mary garden?
I didn't.
Our
The Memorial
is
Garden?
a Mary garden, and established whenever it was established, but in colors of blue and white in honor
Oh.
of Mary. So anyway.
Oh, Mary, M-A-R.
Our-
Mary, why
Like,
is Mary?
Oh, it's Mary
Any-
as well. This is so pretty.
Because it's cheerful?
But anyway, I didn't even think of that till we were leaving class the other day, and this tree is just looks so good right now. So adopted. So I was just thinking, I don't know who decided that years ago when they planted it, but it was to honor. I can't remember.
I didn't.
Women.
Is that a dogwood? I thought it was a star magnolia.
It might be.
The magnolia.
I think it's a magnolia.
But not a real.
Because I had a star magnolia
Not like the
at
South.
our house in Connecticut, and it was the most frustrating thing, because it literally bloomed for a day and a half or 2 days. At least ours did. It was like, quick, stare at it. The rest of the year, it's gonna look ordinary. Whereas this dogwood, like,
They,
lasts for a month.
the blooms stay on them. Yeah. Well, so
Fertilizer.
now that Fred is here, we'll get started.
All rise.
So I want to welcome everybody.
It's exactly 9.
Well, that clock, my clock, that's slow.
Is it?
Yeah, so we're actually at just about 8 after 9 right now. So we're going to get going so that Shelley can, yes.
Mark is gonna start.
We're going to get started now. Just so we have time for Nancy and her testimony.
Oh, I forgot. Your testimony. Testifying.
Witness talk, right? That's all we're doing. So this is the second of a 4-week session that I wanted to put together on women leaders in the church. Part of this is motivated because I had mentioned last week that I'm teaching a course on liberation theologies. I'm teaching a course on liberation theologies, and in going back to sources, in thinking about feminist recoveries of early church tradition, scriptural interpretation, I think it's often, we don't always, I think, lift up the leaders in the wisdom and the real, I think, inspiration that we should have in the 21st century, bringing in all voices. And so we looked at the 3 Marys of the Cross last week with Marianne giving her talk and her kind of testimony about her devotion to Mary, the Mother of God, Mother of Jesus. And then I kind of wanted to take us a little bit through a historical walk. And so I had spent some time in our first year humanities seminar, helping design what was the old curriculum. But one of the things that kind of came to light is that we don't often think about in the monastic tradition. I think the real roots in the wisdom of women, and particularly the desert mothers. And it's actually interesting that of extant texts of the sayings of the desert fathers and mothers, there actually is quite a bit that was recorded, the sayings and the wisdom from these women who went out into the desert and lived as hermits alongside often men. Yeah. So just to give a little bit of background, we're talking about a period after the legalization of Christianity in 380, 381 under the Emperor Theodosius. And so the age of martyrs kind of ended at that point due to the fact that persecution was not widespread. And in fact, Christianity became, as I said, the official religion of Rome. But there was still this kind of hierarchy, understanding of what ways of holiness looked like and what it meant to really witness to Christ crucified and Christ resurrected. And so in an effort to really kind of live out this deep kind of full commitment, we started to see a shift in kind of this looking to other ways that people could show their deep commitment unto death through ascetic life. And so ascesis is kind of a Greek word. It comes from discipline. And it often, when we think about ascesis, if you look in kind of ancient Greek texts, it really refers to the discipline of athletes originally, in the ascesis that they performed. What, John?
Exercise.
Yeah. And if we think about, I mean, the idea of asceticism and exercise, it's meant to keep us at our pinnacle, at our top game, so that if we were called into some sort of necessary kind of competition, whether it be vital or whether it be our own kind of coming to terms with our temptations, that we're ready to enter into that with full confidence that Christ is with us and that we can endure through God's grace. And so the desert mothers and desert fathers went out into deserts, funny, right? But mostly, right, in kind of the areas that we don't typically associate with Christianity now, but was still the cradle of, you know, Christianity in the East. And so in Egypt, where we have kind of the first account is with Abba Anthony. Anthony of the Desert is kind of considered the first one to have kind of taken on this way of life, going out into the desert, seeking solitude, deep prayer, and fasting as ways in order to draw closer to God and to witness in a different way. Now that the age of persecution and what we used to refer to as red martyrdom, the death, you know, kind of showing your testimony by dying for your faith in God and in Christ. There's also what's referred to as green martyrdom, which is often kind of associated with those who die in exile or in prison for their faith. But this kind of new way of going out and taking on an ascetic lifestyle was often kind of termed white martyrdom, and lifted up as a way to kind of celebrate one's devotion to Christ. And so we see here that, you know, it's a focus on one's own spiritual transformation and discipline. But one of the things that it also we have to remember is that this is also kind of the rising tide of the Eastern Roman Empire as the Western Roman Empire was falling away. And to remove oneself from society was often considered a protest to those structures of power, the economics, that often left people disenfranchised. And so there's many ways a real witness of the Desert Fathers and Mothers and kind of challenging the traditional understanding of what it means to have authority, what it means to have power. And by this kind of really, I think, distinct witness in removing oneself from society, you know, it shows that there are alternative ways of living that go beyond our imagination, ways that we can, you know, don't normally think there are alternatives. This is a radical way for us to really think about, how can I speak to power today through heroic action? And those heroic actions can be that of silence, in fact, in showing a different way of living. So there's a couple different I tried to kind of pare this down a little bit, but Hesychia is known as the inner stillness that they often practice. And I think that we still have a great access to this through centering prayer in our own kind of Episcopal and kind of wider tradition here. And I think, Reed, they still celebrate centering prayer on Wednesdays?
Yeah, 10:30 every Wednesday here.
So this is something I think that we...
Nancy and I will be there every week. And multiple others, yeah.
So it's, you know, we still see the real kind of witness to the wisdom and I think the inspiration of the Desert Mothers through continued practices and how they're being born to us today. And really, especially in the midst of so much distraction, so much noise, so much luxury, taking that time to draw oneself closer to God and necessarily drawing ourselves in many ways away from the world is an important thing that they, I think, teach us today. I mentioned that this idea of silence, and so often we think about prophecy as speaking and being loud and that real kind of fervor. And in fact, there's a sense of prophecy with the Desert Mothers in their silence. It's a way of kind of showing that you're using an alternative vision about how to appreciate others and giving space for others to speak, and also that deep listening that can draw one closer to Christ and to really listen for what one's vocation is. I mentioned, I had this whole session, right? I think it was the first time I did adult formation on vocation for those who are kind of aging out. We normally think about vocation as something that you get your call when you're a young person, you follow it, and then the rest of life just kind of peters away. But we are always being called by God. And oftentimes in the day-to-day, the busyness, the noise, we might be missing out on how we are called anew. And the Desert Mothers, I think, really take this as a testimony to how we can continually be listening to God's call. They went out into a physical desert, right? A place, kind of the wilderness, inspired in many ways. We think about the wandering of the Israelites in the desert and being tested in order to enter into the promised land. We think about the 40 days that Jesus went out to be tested in the wilderness. And so this idea, the physical kind of symbolism of a desert, is really kind of important for these people, desert fathers and mothers, who wanted to really kind of follow in Jesus' footsteps. It was seen as kind of doing exactly what he had done. But as kind of the literature and as their kind of meditations were started to be recorded, it's not just the physical location of one embodied in a desert, but the sense of kind of emptying oneself and leaving space for God in our own inner desert to speak to us. And so these deep practices of prayer and of emptying ourselves, kenosis, that we see in Philippians, the great Christological hymn, just as, Christ, empties himself in order to be raised. This is the same way that the Desert Mothers really kind of, I think, sought this sense of holiness, and they saw this spiritual struggle as an important way to draw closer to Christ. So some of the kind of big names to be recognized, I don't know, did anyone take a look at any of the links from the e-news? And you saw probably some, Amma Syncletica of Alexandria is probably one of the most well-known. And so she was one of the first to have her sayings recorded. And so some of those documents really, they go back to the 5th century. And there's an oral tradition of these being passed along before they were recorded. Amma Sarah of the Desert, also a very well-known one. We'll see a quote from her coming up in a minute, but she actually, I love the inspiration that she takes in challenging not just authorities in the wider political and imperial structures through her witness and her asceticism, but she also challenges the Desert Fathers in their claims to authority over the women who were out in the desert. And so Amma Theodora, Mary of Egypt, these are all those who have been recognized as great leaders, and in the Eastern Church, they're revered as saints. They often kind of don't have the same kind of, I think, attention in the Western tradition, just based on geography and kind of the emphasis. But I think that there's a lot to be said in kind of recovering, and there's a lot of, I think, really important work to appreciate them for the sake of ecumenism and Christian unity.
Can I ask,
Sure.
what does Amma mean?
It means mother. So just like Abba is the way in which Jesus refers to father, dad, it's that kind of informal. Amma is the mother.
And where are these all collected? Where do you find these?
There are,
Is there like one collection of them?
there's often, I think, there's edited collections. So there's one that's just called The Sayings of the Desert Fathers. that's the title. The Desert Mothers are also included in there, but once again, I'm trying to sensitize us that often the mothers go underappreciated or ignored, even though the
Imprint on that one.
yeah.
Anyway,
I think that it would be like St. Vladimir Press is often, I think, one that publishes those. Small press out of New York State, often publishing.
If you just go on
There's also PDFs on, yeah.
sayings of the Desert Fathers, and they'll come up.
Yeah. So some of their teachings, I think, guarding against pride and hypocrisy, I think that that's an important one for everybody, right? And that's, if we think about Jesus and his preaching, I mean, that was one of the few times that he takes the big, I think, sin that Jesus calls out is hypocrisy of the Pharisees, of the scribes, of the Levites, of the priesthood, that we have to be authentic. And so I think the wisdom and the teachings of the Desert Mothers toward guarding against our own pride and thinking or lifting ourselves above others, instead, they take on, and they were sought out for their wisdom, and they always saw themselves as servants of others first. There's this idea, I think, also of self-knowledge that is really, I think, the best translation of humility. Humility is not, denigrating oneself or self-deprecation. It's knowing yourself and knowing where you fit in relationships with others, and then really embracing that, not to put yourself above nor below. And this, I think, so we see confidence in the sayings of the Desert Mothers, but we also see a great deal of humility. It's about interchange more than anything else. So we always kind of see this outward asceticism and the sacrifices and the discipline, but it really is about the inner transformation. And in fact, some of the sayings of the Desert Mothers is that if this way of life is actually leading you to pride, is leading you to kind of deep spiritual desolation, go back to society. The whole point is that inner transformation and growing closer to Christ. And it's not, we say here about spiritual warfare, and we often see that's a term that it's been popularized, I think, again, in the past 20, 30 years in a lot of Christian denominations. But the idea of spiritual warfare is not so much to focus on war and overcoming others, but on endurance. And that importance about holding close to Christ when there are other things that might draw us away. And so, Amos Enclitica, I just have some short quotes here, but in the beginning there are a great many battles. And I think that that's, always, whenever we start out, I think, on any valuable endeavor, it's often in those first critical moments, first critical days, that we can easily lose heart and be drawn away. But the idea, we talked about endurance, and this kind of focus on uniting oneself to Christ and making that our primary focus and our primary identity is really critical. I mentioned Ama Sarah before.
Do you mind if I?
Please.
In centering prayer, one of the teachings from the originators of centering prayer is that the first 15 minutes are the hardest. And I mean, I know I repeat that often, but it's challenging in that you say, like, but the hardest part comes right at the beginning. And yet it's an affirmation so that when that difficulty comes upon you, you're not surprised, and you know that you're bearing it in common with others.
Yeah.
That in the beginning, when you try to listen to God, of course you just feel all the things you've been bearing or storing up from the world, they sort of wash over you.
Yeah.
When I go to the monastery, at first, well, what's going to happen now? What should I? And then after, when you're ready to leave, I don't want to
Right.
leave. It's so still, it's quiet.
Ama Sarah, as I said, she challenges the authorities, even the Desert Fathers themselves, who often tried to take on a greater role in authority, even though the understanding was that all of the people who go out to the desert are seeking Christ and are there as equals. The Desert Mothers often were ridiculed or were tried to be denigrated by the Desert Fathers. And so Sarah, there's this kind of wonderful exchange that's recorded where there are 4 Desert Fathers who kind of come to her and accuse her of all sorts of licentiousness, blasphemy, all sorts of these very deep accusations. And she basically tells them, go back to your place. It is, it is I who am a man and you who are a woman. Inverting that kind of power structure, trying to challenge the patriarchy. And I think that's remarkable for the 4th and 5th century. And then Amma Theodora, again, kind of focusing on what is the goal, what is the end of all of this. It's not on the outer, kind of practices, the kind of the appearances. It's about true humility. That's what the Desert Mothers are kind of, I think, offering us. Answer the question, I believe, Amma, spiritual mother, and they really became guides and role models for people who would seek them out coming from Byzantium and Constantinople, that coming all the way down into Syria, into Egypt. They'd go on these long pilgrimages seeking this wisdom. And it wasn't just women seeking the Desert Mothers, but men seeking the Desert Mothers and recognizing that true authority. I'm not going to try to pronounce the Papathamagada. Actually, I did that pretty well, Patram here. But that's kind of what I talked about, some of the earliest sources. That's one that if anyone wants to look that up, you can see that there are some really neat photos of those manuscripts that, as I said, go back to 5th century. After these sayings were orally transmitted, there were scribes who wrote them down to preserve them, noting that these were going to be important treasures for the patrimony and the matrimony of the church, right? And so we think about, I think it's important to think about the Desert Mothers as mothers of souls in early Christianity, and how they can continue to share their wisdom with us today. So there's just kind of some elements of their legacy, and I encourage, dig in a little bit deeper. As I said, there was a link to some, sayings that were there in the e-news. I do have PDFs of some of the sayings of the Desert Mothers. If anyone is interested, I can also make those available and pass those along. Are there any questions before we move into our next phase of today's session? Fred.
One question. A lot of the early Christian women martyrs are martyrs because they don't comply with parental, paternal direction that they are to marry. Basically, that they are property to be given. And instead they say, no, I'm dedicating my life to Christ, and that creates a little conflict, and someone ends up dead. And it's not the father. So once Christianity is the official religion, and women are how does that dynamic change with women who want to go and if this is before monasticism is systematized, how does that, is there still that conflict in families? Do we know about that? About somebody saying, I'm going to go off into the desert, and the father saying, no, we're going to marry so-and-so.
Yeah.
Is there still that conflict?
In fact, I think that was the story of Amma Theodora, was betrothed to a wealthy, patrician in the kind of Eastern Empire. And that was exactly the kind of the recordings. And I think there even were kind of stories of miracles associated with her, that she was kind of like imprisoned and told, no, you're going to marry. And then kind of just like Peter, the jail door, the door is opened and out she walks, and, and then they try to detain her and arrest her, and supposedly like angels come and, fling off the attempted, those who were trying to detain her.
So this is sort of a continuation of that martyrdom story.
Yeah. So it really is. I mean, as we,
Of male authority.
yeah. So as we said, there's kind of, after red martyrdom, kind of started to decline for good reason, but no more, active persecutions. And there, we always want to remember that the church is always kind of, it's whether or not, who's persecuting. And sometimes it's internally, right? The church. And I think it's especially difficult with the navigation of power structures. And once Christianity becomes the imperial religion, there's always the question of who's serving who. Is the church serving Christ? Is the church serving Caesar?
Very important question of our times.
And that power struggle is still out there.
Yeah.
You know, it really is. And not necessarily in the churches, it's spread. It's like a swamp,
Yeah.
They have I was mentioned this morning that the Time magazine has 25 of the women in the Bible this month, and I've gotten it. It's very interesting. I've gotten about 5 pages into it. It's very historical, the culture, the struggles, and it's not necessarily the saints of the church. It's women in the Bible that they've really researched. So
I'm going to have to pick that up. Thank you. That's wonderful.
absolutely. I mean, it's
Timely with this
yeah.
4 weeks
That's
as
what
well.
I said this morning. I went, I'm coming.
We've been talking to Mark Ragani.
I brought along 2 books, thinking Mary Ann, but anybody can borrow them or in fact keep them. She Who Is, The Mystery of God in Feminist Theological Discourse, and Truly Our Sister, A Theology of Mary and the Communion of Saints.
Yeah. So, in an effort to share our space with a Amma here among us, I'm going to pass along the microphone to Nancy to offer us a little bit about her journey in faith and I think the special relationship you had with Mary Grace.
Yes, I was baptized in the Lutheran Church, grew up in it, and was confirmed in 1953. And in that period of time, I was pretty young. I didn't understand confirmation. I don't even remember being, going to class to be confirmed. But then this woman, Mary Grace, her name is so beautiful, came into my life. She was my Sunday school teacher. Her father was our minister, and I used to babysit all of her children. So, she was so kind and wonderful and really loved me. I mean, she really hugged me. And her husband did too. And she talked to me about not necessarily church. We talked about everything. And she was my mentor until she died in her 80s. And I would go down in November to be with my mom for her birthday. But I always saved a day for Mary Grace. And we got together at 9, and I'd be still talking at 5. We just had such a great time. And then when I was getting divorced, she said, "We didn't prepare you for this. We failed you." I said, "No, I don't think you did." But she was there every time I needed her. And when my dad died, very young, at 60, she was there for me for that, because he was the person closest to me and my family. My older brother, my younger brother, they went their own ways. But I kept going back when I got divorced and saying, something is missing. Dave and I never went to church, except Christmas. And we took the kids. And then I put Elizabeth and Dee in Sunday school for a year. And those of you who know Elizabeth, when she finished that year, she said, "Never doing this again." So I wasn't going to force her. And it just, I thought, I'm doing something wrong. And then one day in March, it was raining, and I thought, I'm going to church, thinking that it started at 10:30. I got here, and I looked at the board, and it said 10 o'clock. So I turned around, just as Bob Wells was walking out from teaching Sunday school, and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Home. Church has already started." He said, "No, you're coming in with me."
Ah.
So he brought me in, sat me down in front of and behind Helen Hackwell. Does anybody remember Helen?
I
She
never
was-
knew her, but boy, she's a legend. I
She
feel like
is.
I know her
She
from the
is.
stories,
The
right?
mothers.
And she turns around and she says, "I'll talk to you right after the service." And so I waited, and she came over and she said, "We're delighted you're here. And you know Lloyd, don't you?" And I said, "No, I've never met Lloyd. He was an Episcopal priest, retired." And so I felt welcomed, and I kept coming back, but not really being involved because I was still working, and realtors worked on Sundays. But then when I retired, I really got involved with the church, and I just feel like that period of time, I felt really good. And one day, I was out weeding in my garden, and I thought, wow, this is great. You know, I'm out here in nature where I've always been, and I'm going to church again. Mary Grace is deceased, but I know she hears my voice. So that's my story. It's not fantastic, but to me, it's very personal.
No, it's lovely.
I'd call it fantastic.
You what?
I'd call it fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, if I hadn't had her in my life, I don't know where I'd be.
Well, it's a great lesson. You never know how your own actions are going to impact those,
Yes.
their whole lives. And that as we choose to extend ourselves, that might be the gift that we give someone. And again, that we may never know.
That's true, and Elizabeth amazingly has a family that loves her too. So it's like,
A family outside of yours
Yeah.
that has sort of like adopted.
sort
or
of
kind
like
Oh.
I had, so I think
Lovely.
that's great.
Nancy, I've heard you say another time that Mary Grace was really a mother to you,
Oh, totally.
and that gives so much flavor through everything you've just shared. To when people would say the desert Alma,
Yes,
it's that Mary Grace was that mother
she was.
guiding you in spirit and in fact through your life.
Yes, really, from teenage till, well, I don't know how old I was when she died, but it was hard, really hard to lose her. But I mean, still in touch with her daughter. And so life goes on. I'm not embarrassing her daughter.
Does she live in the South where you grew up?
Yeah, she lived in Richmond,
Richmond, okay.
yeah. And
Well, she grew up in Richmond. How did I not know that?
because you
All
didn't.
us Richmond girls need to get together.
You know, the accent comes out every once in a while,
Is
Martha.
it? Yeah, because
You
my
what?
mom
I
grew
said
up
your
in-
accent comes out every once in a while.
If I'm visiting down there, it definitely gets better.
My mother used to do
And
that
my,
too.
my best friend that I've known literally for 80 years is an Episcopalian. But she didn't have any influence on me as far as churches. But she's always been there for me too.
Yeah,
I've had good friends.
yeah, you have. But
We're
you're a
good
loyal
friend.
friend.
You what?
Means you're a good friend.
Nancy, are there any sayings or any words that you remember from Mary Grace that stay with you? Something like the sayings of the desert? What
I
would
think
Amma
when I
Mary
was
Grace
getting
say to you?
divorced and she said to me, we didn't prepare you for this. And she was cleaning out her house at some point, and she had all these letters from men that she had dated that thought she was fantastic. And she said, Why don't you read some of these? They're really fun. So I did. But, and her husband was equally as involved with me. And he would pick me up and take me back when I was babysitting. And he would talk to me, and he was an interesting guy. He was CIA in Richmond.
Wow.
And so Mary Grace would say, "You got all your credentials?" When they'd go out. And they trusted me.
Yeah.
So I tip my hat to her.
It's really
I hope
nice.
everybody has a helper, someone that cares about them. I mean, it wasn't that my family didn't care about me, but this was special.
Mhm.
How about you?
I think one thing that's coming to my mind as you're sharing is the great way in which you were respected and called into responsibility.
Mm.
And that sharing, the confidence that she entrusted you with, Mary Grace and her husband,
Yeah.
was something that was meaningful and powerful for you. And that sense of, being welcomed as a family member is also.
And that's how I feel here,
Mhm.
is that I'm welcomed and loved. And
Well,
I
you do such a good job welcoming, and I think I've told you this before, but the first time Pam and I ever came here was the day that the annual meeting catered lunch was going on. And how does that happen in the spring, right? And we walked, people were encouraging us to come upstairs, and we kind of, came with the flow. We got up here and we're like, oh no, this is a lot. And you were standing there and you were like, no, you can sit down, you can stay. And we slithered out. We were too embarrassed because we could tell it was like a big deal. But you were that's one of the things I remember is how eagerly you were trying to draw us in and welcome us.
Oh, thank
So,
you.
yeah.
That sense of hospitality is also an important thing that the Desert Mothers are well known for, and it continues to be an important part of the monastic traditions. Like the Benedictines, like St. Anselm College, that's what we always, the superficial ways, we always hold the doors open for people. But the idea that these women went out into the desert doesn't mean that if people came to them, they would welcome that person as Christ at the door. And I think that's just a beautiful way in which you witnessed this too, Nancy.
I was lucky.
So was she.
When did the Desert Mothers, when did that die out?
At least for the kind of the ones that we have kind of recorded here, about 5th century, when you started to see a rise in actually organized cloistered monasteries and abbeys, with the founding of, the Benedictines, and then, the tradition of Saint Scholastica, Benedict's sister, founding the community as well. And
Let's
so-
get control over all this.
Fred?
Let's get some control over all this.
And it was also at a period where I think the riskiness of going out into the desert and the kind of the collapse, especially of the Western Roman Empire,